the 29th anniversary of SASO, under a theme of building a modern student movement to deepen the national democratic revolution and for attainment of the workers' class power. William Butler, the poet, immediately after the First World War, authored a poem titled The Second Coming, which depicts a picture of a world that is at war with itself, a world with no certainty and where the sender cannot hold. He deliberately speaks about the second coming as to reflect on the return of Jesus Christ. Today, the student movement were yet again confronted by yet another moment of despair as the world. A world with no certainty of future prospect. A world confronted by the novel coronavirus. A world suffocated by capitalism. Greetings to the Commander-in-Chief, the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, the leader of our own masses. Greetings to COSATU President Singiswa Lusi on behalf of all workers. SACP General Secretary Dr. Blade Nzimande, the leader of the Vanguard Party. Greetings to the YCNSA National Secretary Kate Atinyeko, the COSAS leadership, SASCO leadership, its members, listeners, and the masses of our country. Greetings to the world. It is very unfortunate that I speak to you on the 29th SASCO anniversary celebration from a visual platform, and I do so at the height of COVID-19 pandemic, which has robbed us of many of our people. May their soul rest in peace. You can mention few: Comrade Lufele, Prof. Pepeta, the old and the downtrodden people who died due to the lack of access to basic health care post-COVID-19. The NHI must be adopted and implemented as a matter of urgency. Let's take 10 seconds of moment of silence in honor and respect of all frontline workers who died on their boots while serving our country. We must as well take this moment again to bid a farewell to our convener of Free State, Comrade Lufele. Thank you. It is the task of all revolutionaries to assess their decisions over time. This is more when it comes to the fulfillment of the historic mission of the liberation of our people from the bondages of oppression and exploitation. We therefore feel obligated in the student movement to assess our role and character in relation to this task. Hence, the political program of building a modern student movement to deepen the national democratic revolution and the attainment of the working class power. We can only do that as SASCO if we have a particular understanding of our history. We cannot shy away from the fact that ours is a history of a deep inequality between the rich and the poor, white people and black people, men and women, and of the oppression and exploitation. As we seek to build a modern student movement to respond to the historic mission, These are the realities that we need to take into consideration, lest we miss the three of the moods. We must fight the neoliberal capitalist order that every time attempts to commodify the basic necessities of life. The capitalist imperialist forces who constantly seek to shape every aspect of our lives, including education, must wage a relentless war against reactionary forces, locally and globally. This is what SASCO must understand and tackle without any hesitation. As we do that, we need to offer alternatives. We need to think beyond the current malicious and offer hope to our students and young people in general. This is part of what it means to build a modern student movement, deepen and defend the national democracy and pursue the hegemony of the working class. We have nothing to fear since we do not start from scratch at SASCO. SASCO has a sound history of waging struggles for the benefit of the poor students and workers. We need to learn from such history and fashion out a radically advanced imagination that is responsive to the modern era's needs and challenges. Every branch of SASCO must see it that is strengthening its fighting capacity for the realization of this noble historic mission. As part of the working class struggle, a student movement and its politics must never be found wanting on matters of justice and equality and lack thereof. It is our structure and their capacity to pursue our mission and defend our gains that SASCO can be referred to as a modern student movement. This is modern day technology can be used for progressive change. And therefore, a key aspect of building a student movement by cultivating our capacity from the branch level to the national level, nothing can stop us to realize what we set ourselves to achieve. The turning point in the country. The 1976 16 June uprising began in Soweto and spread countrywide, profoundly changed the socio-economic landscape in South Africa. Events that regard the uprising can be traced back from policies of apartheid government that resulted to the introduction of the Bantu Education Act in 1953. The rise of the Black Consciousness Movement, the BCM. The formation of the South African Student Organization, which is SASCO, raised by political consciousness of many students, while others joined the wave of anti-apartheid sentiment within the student community. When the language of Afrikaans along English was made compulsory as a medium of instruction in schools back in 1974, Black students began to mobilize themselves. On the 16th of June 1976, between 3,000 to 10,000 students mobilized by South African student movements, actions committee supported by BCM marches, peacefully to demonstrate and protest against the government's directive. The march was meant to culminate at a rally in Orlando Stadium. On their part, they were met with heavily formed armed police who fired tear gas, later live ammunition on demonstrating to students, which is the same thing that happened to Fismas Fall when students were shot and when students were arrested by the Little government. This resulted in a widespread revolt that turned into an uprising against the government. While the uprising began in Soweto, it spread across the country, carried out until the following year. The aftermath of event in 1976 had dire consequences of the apartheid government and set a tone of what was to transpire in the 1980s, late in the 1994 political breakthrough. The agitation of young lions, which is necessary. The agitation of young lions organized under a banner of students culminated into an imminent formation of student formations, including COSAS. Their revolutionary perspective also was informed that they were members of the community before they were students. Hence, members of the student formation, they were found in communities like civic organization. For what matter, they were at the forefront of establishing these mass-based formations. And their members were also found underground, in the underground structures of these, in the most forward trenches within the formations and detachments of our people's army on Condorcet. So students became a container of young revolutionaries who were politically versatile to be students during the day, community activists after school, combats during the night. It is therefore not surprising that you find that students are found in all corners who have historic commemoration campaigns in the 1979 hanging, the Cade of Solomon Mahlangu, and the centenary of people's victory over the colonial British troops at Sandra. So during the 1980s and the height of resistance against the human apartheid system that was declared a crime against humanity by the United Nations, students, especially high school levels, they were at the forefront of struggles against the banned education, particularly the apartheid regime generally. Due to its militance and the correctness of politics, student formation will bore the wrath of apartheid regime repression, hence the detention of almost the entire leadership and changing within the federal of aims of the ANC, the South African Communist Party, of our first president, Mogale, who ultimately served the time of Robert Island. Hence, in 1984, students made key demands that were championed in the school and supported by communities. The establishment and recognition of the SRCs to replace the discredited perfect system, the removal of age limits rule, the end of corporal punishment, the teachers to stop sexually harassing female students. How sad that this menace is still with us today, and we need to fight it recklessly. That the racist and repressive police and army withdraw from school and township. It was against this background that students began to mobilize in different townships across the country. We were addressing bread and butter issues, was involved in the broader struggles for emancipation of Blacks in general, Africans in particular, with the emphasis of African leadership. They understood that they could not achieve our objectives without the broader liberation of our people. They also recognized the importance of education in an oppressive and demeaning environment of the time. Without fear of contradiction, student activists generally played a central role in organizing resistance to apartheid. They were instruments in the formation of the UDF, which is the United Democratic Front, and the Congress Trade Unions, amongst other plethora of mass-based organizations. Hence, students became the key force within the UDF structures. Students organized boycotts, mobilized campaigns like stayaways, and provided support for regional and local campaigns. Whilst almost all comrades were disgusted by student burning during the state of emergency in 1985. came as no surprise that students were a thorn in the flesh in the racist regime. So the year 1985 signals the beginning of the end of the apartheid society and government in South Africa. Following the upsurge of violent and non-violent resistance to the Russian exclusive system of apartheid, which had seemingly minority of white population of South Africa, exclusively government and control the social and economic political mechanism of every day of life for 37 years. The apartheid government under P.W. Botha declared a particular state of emergency including July 1985. The moment of the draconian law enforcement against the majority black, colored Indian population of South Africa provided a focal moment in the struggle against the apartheid, as the international condemnation of the apartheid regime and other internal factors contributed this rejuvenation of the grassroots resistance inside and outside the country. The apartheid government used the extreme force as means of government, was justified in ways that raised from a belief in an eminent external communist attack and maintaining the peace and order, which was threatened by the increasingly ungovernable nature of black township and radical black nationalists through the country. So, if you analyze and take the genesis in Tunisia, a 26-year-old Mohammed was getting ready to sell fruits and vegetables in the rural town in city Bouziz, Tunisia. Bouziz was the breadwinner of his widowed mother and 6 siblings, but he didn't have a permit to sell goods. When the police asked Bouziz to hand over his wooded car, he refused, and the policewoman alleged slapped him. Angered after being publicly humiliated, he marched in front of the government building and set himself on fire. His act of desperation resonated immediately with others in the town. Protests began that day in city Bouziz, captured by cell phone cameras shared on the internet. Within a day, protests started popping up across the country, calling up the president, Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali, and his regime to step down. About a month later, he fled the mental in Tunisia, set off the uprising across the Middle East, and that became known as the Arab Spring. Was on Egypt, Ezra Fattah, an Egyptian democracy activist known as Facebook Girl, for her social media saying, fought for a new Egypt. She was also an organizer for the major protest in Tahrir Square on the 21st of January 2011. An Egyptian anti-government protester held a defecate poster of Egyptian President Mubarak with the words, "Mubarak, get out," written above during the demonstration in Cairo and in January. When President Mubarak stepped down, it was thought that Egypt had completed its revolution. But now Egypt starts its first round of free and fair elections. Fattah tells Weekends on All Things Considered host Guy Raz that she isn't so sure that the work is over. Always I am optimistic for the future of Egypt. But now I have some worry, she says. I think maybe the result of the revolution will take longer than expected. And I argue, as the 21st NEC, that the revolution that we're leading is not an event. And some will feel that their efforts are taking forever and will lead not to result to anything positive. To them, we say the right time to start any revolution is always now. What is necessary is to identify motive forces and soldier on in pursuing the total liberation for own people. Fatah in Egypt already having a major setback during this period of transition. And despite Mubarak stepping down, she says, the country is still in Mubarak regime. And the life is not better than it was a year ago. And the question we should ask ourselves as well is, where is South Africa? Fatah among those who say the real transition in Egypt will happen when civilian leader is elected. The elections of 2011 put Muslim Brotherhood, and that perhaps is not exactly what secular activists had in mind. And we agree with Ahmed that the pitfalls of the Middle East will not be seen through the rise of the Islamic Brotherhood over the displacement of the Christian community. No domination of one group must be encouraged by the coexistence of all contending forces must be permitted. In the years since the beginning of the Arab Spring, leaders have been outsighted in Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and Yemen. At the start, it would have been hard to imagine how much the movement would spread throughout the region. But certainly can't be said that it came out of nowhere. The revolution had been building up from decades in Egypt. Youth and education. The large share of young people in the population, high level of the youth unemployment, are identified particularly in the important Arab Spring context. While earlier generation of youth benefited from the economic setup, those born after the 1980s were no longer guaranteed these sentiments, these same institutions and high level of standards. The unemployment rate among other those who are ages from 15 to 24 was 25 to 6% in 2023, the highest in the world. The number of unemployed youth in the Middle East increased by 25% between 1998 to 2008. The rise in youth unemployment countries came about despite improvements in education. Education levels increased significantly in the Middle East in the past 3 decades, or not on average, higher than those in countries with similar development levels. So over the period of 1980s to 2010, the average years of schooling for those 25 and older, Algeria, Egypt, and Libya, and Morocco, Tunisia, there was also a significant improvement in higher education attainment because the cases increased almost threshold. Increased education made people unwillingly to take the low-skilled, low-paid jobs that might be available to them. Most still craved the security of public sector employment. Then the survey of Syrian graduates reported a preference for public sector jobs, with nearly 60% saying they would not only take such jobs, however, the quality of education in Arab countries has been identified as a contribution in high youth unemployment. The education system largely prepared students for employment in government programs, where the opportunities were limited and did not provide them with knowledge and skills needed for the modern world. The skills mismatch in turn increased pressure on the public sector to absorb graduates to unable to find jobs in the private sector. While the nexus between education and democracy is debatable, studies show that education, in particularly primary schooling, can be a strong predictor to democratization. On Arab countries' plotted score for a community use indicator of democracy against the average years of schooling, it found the democracy index scores to be considered lower than those corresponding to their education level. Thanks to the high levels of education, as well the globalization and readily available of information, this generation differed from previous one in having greater awareness of how people elsewhere live in higher expectation. The increased capacity of the Arab youth and their inability to translate to human development gains into higher incomes and political participation, explaining why the middle class shifted allegiance and took it to the streets. The same day, the same situation came to be said about the youth economic climate in South Africa. More literate and less employment opportunity. The global economic crisis in the Middle East and the North of Africa, especially hard because of their high dependence on imported food. Most countries buy half of what they eat from abroad. This means they suck in the flood of inflation when the world prices rise. They spark with some staple crops doubling the price. There was a regime-wide 32% increase in food prices. Despite increasing government subsidy in some countries, Tunisia, the governmental expenditure on subsidy tripled from 2000 to 2010. But even this was not enough to maintain the price of basic supply and energy. I'm raising this as a case study for our own country and what needs to be the position of young people. I trace it on the contribution of those who do not have any means, who have started and have brought their ideas, and the capitalist system have taken their ideas. I'm raising this because I need us to refer to something as the South Africa on how to move forward. A continuing battle, Mr. President, as we celebrate yet another milestone, let us forward the following primary demands to the President of the country, the President of the Hills. We demand the increase of the NSFAS threshold from 350,000 to 600,000 per annum. We demand the dissolution of councils of historically disadvantaged universities who have failed to transform the institutions of higher learning. We demand the speedy appointment of the NSFAS board. We demand the speedy delivery of laptops to all poor students from the working class background. Transformation of TVET sector to institutions of choice. We have said, President, it is the only time where you can find students using their rooms as classrooms, where students are studying in their rooms. So we are saying all TVET colleges that needs to be transformed, the government must take that into consideration and must make sure that all historical disadvantaged universities, they start to be a construction site. All TVET colleges, they start to be a construction site, and make sure that there are no students who do not have a place to sleep. There are no students who do not have rooms to sleep. We're saying, Mr. President, build student villages to directly respond to the housing and student accommodation crisis. We're saying, Mr. President, deliver a student bank to administer student finances and directly confront the monopoly capital owned and controlled by white males in party two. We feel that a student bank will do us justice. A student bank that understands on how the finances of students must operate. A student bank that understands that between the days of you getting NSFAS, you do not have anything but a student bank that can assist students and not take from students, but a student bank that is going to understand the issues of students. immediate
Tiba, I think just
president
before we move on to the
during
numbers, which I know you're going to bring
2020
to us in a
of the
moment
time
as
frame
far as
for
KZN is
building
concerned, let's just give
90 vet colleges and university of Ekurhuleni that we want to be named after Comrade Krizan. Immediate appointment of the NYGA board that is dominated by poor and working class youth. Mr. President, young people are waiting. Young people cannot wait any longer. We call for a creation of a 24-hour economy that will stimulate demand and create more employment for the working class youth. We demand the end of corruption with an immediate effect. Saying, Mr. President, we know that you don't have a police station in your house and you don't have handcuffs. But you are saying, Mr. President, we demand immediate arrest of all those who are stealing from the masses of our people, and all those who are stealing from the poor, be it whatever high national position that they are occupying. They must be arrested before it's too late. We need to renew the African National Congress. Mr. President, we demand an immediate adoption of the GBV policy for our government. The space is not safe for our sisters and brothers anymore. Mr. President, we have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic that the implementation of the NHI is of the paramount importance. Mr. President, we demand to you the unban of the ANC League before the country is ungovernable. Before young people organize themselves. It won't be the first time, Mr. President, that young people will organize themselves. And we don't want it to happen under your leadership.
the 6th of September. In
fact, but Mr. President,
new cases,
if you are quiet,
200.
We'll have no choice but to make the country ungovernable. Because young people are frustrated. Young people, they need their own leadership that is going to speak their language. We don't need old people to speak our language. We don't need people that you have appointed to speak our language. We need young people to lead us as young people. We need to debate as young people and provide a clear way forward on how to attain the national democratic revolution. From Tiananmen Square to the Kent, the White Revolution of Germany, the Arab Spring, the Velvet Revolution, into the Fizz Must Fall movement. The students have always been at the center of driving the socio-political, economic change in the world. From here henceforth, we must remind the world of the wise words of Paulo Freire when he said, "Liberation is a childbirth, send it is painful one. The man or woman who emerges is a new person. viable only as the oppressor or the oppressed contradiction is surpassed by the humanization of all people. Or to it other way, the solution to this contradiction is born in the labor which brings into the world this new being, no longer oppressed, but human in the process of achieving freedom. I thank you. Happy birthday, Sasko. Happy birthday.
Yeah. Thank you, comrades. We are moving swiftly to welcome the President of the African National Congress. But we are saying that, Mr. President, you have heard the demands of SASCO. We hope, President, that as we celebrate our 29th anniversary, you have listened to our message. President, we are bringing to you the demands as tabled by the President on what the students of this country are saying. We are saying, Mr. President, it is unfortunate that we are celebrating this 29th anniversary without the African National Congress Youth League. We are celebrating our 29th anniversary without a National Youth Development Agency board. Our people, our students, our youth are without leadership. We're saying, President, there's a vacuum in the country of young people created purposely by your generation, Mr. President, and those who are at the helm of the leadership of this country. We're saying, Mr. President, it can no longer be that the missing middle does not have a form of funding, because we agreed, Mr. President, that the middle strata is suffering. They are languishing in debts. We must, President, free ourselves from this problem. It cannot be that, Mr. President, you have a situation where at the age of 21, you have debts that are in hundreds of thousands, whilst you have not even begun to employ. Our call for free, quality, and compulsory education remains our call, Mr. President, because our education system needs to accommodate and our education system needs to produce graduates that will actually contribute in this country, Mr. President. That is why, Mr. President, we are saying to you that today the youth of this country must be at the center and at the top of the agenda. We must allow the young people to take over this country, Mr. President. We have, Mr. President, written to you to say to you, Mr. President, that we have serious challenges as it comes in terms of development of the young people, as it comes, Mr. President, to the problems which this country faces, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, with those few words, we are saying to you, Mr. President, we are tired of writing letters. We are tired of making demands, Mr. President, and your voice is not heard in responding to those. We hope, Mr. President, that today you will be able to respond to our demands. We have, Mr. President, written to your office in light of the delay of transformation implementation. We have, Mr. President, said the Department of Higher Education and Training must release the acting DDG of TVET colleges, because we believe that we must make TVET colleges a primary and make them institutions of first choice. We have, Mr. President, said that the Director General must be released. We need a young and energetic voice, and that will actually take the matters of students serious. We can't, Mr. President, have within your government people that believe that the administration of apartheid, which was a crime against people, is actually or has actually done good work this current administration. So, Mr. President, as we hand over to you, we are saying, Mr. President, you must prioritize the agenda as given by the students of this country. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we're ready for you, Mr. President. We greet you and we welcome you. We're saying, President, address the students, address the country on this special occasion. Over to you, Mr. President. Comrade President.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, President.
Okay.
Thank you. You can start, Comrade President.
Oh, can you hear me? Should I?
Yes,
well,
yes.
Thank you, Program Director and President of SASCO, and members of the National Executive Committee of Revolutionary Student Movement, SASCO, and the leadership of the SACP, COSATU, the ANC Youth League, YCL, and COSAS, and friends and all the comrades who have gathered, albeit virtually, to celebrate this fantastic anniversary. I convey warm greetings to all of you on behalf of the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress, your movement. It gives me great pleasure to have been invited to be part of this virtual rally marking 29 years since the formation of South African Student Congress. Although we would have wished and preferred to celebrate this most significant milestone with a massive rally at a stadium somewhere, we have to contend with and adapt to the new normal of social distancing that has been imposed on us by COVID-19. To this end, I commend the leadership of SASCO for embracing the new ways of organizing political activity and refusing and not allowing COVID-19 to render the organization completely moribund. Notwithstanding the absence of thousands upon thousands of warm bodies that we are accustomed to at manifestations such as this that were meant to celebrate 29 years of existence, this virtual rally does provide us with the opportunity to reflect on the important place and role of SASCO, both in our society and in the mass democratic movement. SASCO is part of the progressive forces in our society pursuing the objectives of the National Democratic Revolution, consistent with its historic mission of being the intellectual hub for the mass democratic movement. SASCO asserts in its strategic perspective on transformation, SPOT as it is called, document, that we are members of the community seeks to produce thinking and highly conscientized members who are concerned about the challenges facing society in general and are in the end part of society and are also organic to the cause of the people. This was certainly the case when many of us were students. We saw ourselves being intricately linked with the concerns, the struggles, and the aspirations of society. The assertion in the SPOT document thus brings SASCO a step closer to being an organization of organic intellectuals. And yet, the overriding question that must be answered honestly is whether or not the rank and file membership of SASCO fully understand and appreciate the depth of the revolutionary content of such a simple sounding phrase. I suspect that it is on the basis of this very phrase that you as an organization have community work as one of the pillars of your day-to-day struggles. You were quite correct in this thinking and conceptualization because the history of the student movement in our country, particularly in the 60s and 70s, is littered and decorated with best examples of how a student organization can truly be committed both in theory and in practice to community work. Amongst those examples, SASO, the organization to which I belonged and which laid the foundation for the formation of SASCO, was very instrumental in the establishment of community health centers, advice offices, literacy classes, and other such areas of community development where students could volunteer their skills in service to our people. And this was done as a defiance of the oppressive system of apartheid. And at times, the student leaders and students who participated in these were often pursued, arrested, banned, and detained. Steve Biko, Bani Pichana, Eri Nengwekulu, and many others were part of this type of activism as a rejection of the apartheid system, but also to begin to imagine the future that our people longed for. And it was students who led this charge. It was students who demonstrated that they are indeed prepared, willing, and able to be of service to the people of our country. Were they persecuted? Yes. Were some of them even killed and murdered by the apartheid regime? Yes. And that is precisely the history that you have, and you stand on the shoulders of those giants. People who were prepared not only to focus on theory, but also to practice what they were articulating. The progressive student movement in this country has always seen and appreciated its role and duty beyond campus boundaries. It is for this reason that when the call was made during the decade of freedom to render South Africa ungovernable and apartheid unworkable, the student movement formed part of the broader progressive youth movement organized under the auspices of the South African Youth Congress, SAICO, whose 33rd anniversary we marked earlier this year. This united youth movement is what made the relaunch of the ANC Youth League relatively seamless following the unbanning of the liberation movement in 1990. The question SASCO must once again answer is whether or not there is any practical and coordinated work undertaken by the organization in community, amongst and with the people, consistent with the assertion of the spot document, which says, I quote, "We are members of the community before we are students," close quote. I'm asking these practical questions not with the intention of imposing an additional burden on SASCO, but because I believe that they are important in order for the student movement to know and fully appreciate its role in the advancement of the national democratic revolution. We've had outstanding leaders who have traversed this path before. And we are lucky that to this day we have a number of them who can continue to bear testimony to this aspect of work. People like Dr. Mampela Rampela are still with us, Bani Pijana are still with us, Erinengwe Kuru, and many others. And hence the importance of this question. But I'm rather glad that it is a question that you have identified in your spot document. The ANC has determined that we are now in the second phase of our long-drawn transition from colonialism of a special type to the National Democratic Society. The tasks of the revolution during this decisive phase include educating and training a critical mass of ANC members ideologically, politically, academically, as well as morally. It is impossible to imagine that this can happen successfully without the active involvement of SASCO because of the organization's primary location in centers of knowledge, production, and consumption. The approach employed by SASCO in its relationship with the ANC is that it will complement the ANC where it agrees and contradicts where it disagrees, is encouraged. It is indicative of the political maturity of the student movement and the deep understanding of constructive criticism as one of the basic tenets of our organizational philosophy. It is, however, important to mention that contradicting the ANC on policy matters should not be the same as the headline and soundbite-driven populism of shouting down from rooftops everything the ANC does or says. Your responsibility as young revolutionary intellectuals must shape the future of this country, and in doing so, you must engage very thoroughly the ANC on whatever matter through the various available platforms and channels. You must always remember that true to its nature as the real Congress of the people, the ANC is as much yours as it is ours who happen to lead it at this point in time. For the ANC to succeed in executing the tasks of the National Democratic Revolution, it needs an educated society with the necessary skills to build a sustainable and inclusive economy. Our universities and TVET colleges have an immeasurable role to play in this regard. We need young people who are conscious, whose level of consciousness is at a fairly high level, conscious of the tasks at hand, and who will participate both in the conceptualization and implementation of our program of fundamental socio-economic transformation. SASCO also has an immense role to play in the creation of a conscious and mobilized citizenry, upon which the success of the national democratic revolution is dependent. Now, we continue to create vehicles and platforms to make sure that we do indeed have a highly conscientized citizenry. And this is where a student movement plays a critical role. Conscientized in terms of political knowledge and understanding, and making sure that our people have a broad and world view of issues that affect their lives. But also conscientized and highly mobilized in the way of supporting government, working with government to achieve the ideals of the NDR. And a good example is recently we decided that we should have a government that functions seamlessly from national right down to local government. And that is why we decided on embarking on and setting up a district development model, where we will have one plan at the national level, one plan at the district level, one plan at the provincial level, and at the local level as well. But this also means that we need to have our people participating rather in an active manner in the affairs that affect their lives, in the affairs of the state, affairs of government, service delivery, improvement, and development. And it is this that a SASCO needs to play a role in getting our people to know that they have a role to play as active citizens. You have a responsibility to conscientize students, yes, and ensure that our universities are never turned into incubators of only a particular kind of thinkers who not only harbor anti-ANC sentiments, but also actively work to produce more and more who are opposed to the objectives of our revolution. You must pursue this mission relentlessly with a full understanding that our revolution is doomed to fail if we do not constantly and continuously and consistently win society over in the battle of ideas. And this is where, as highly conscientized students under the banner of our student movement, SASCO, play a key role. Beyond this, students have a responsibility to make use of all available opportunities and to pass all modules or studies in pursuance of yet another objective of SASCO, which is academic excellence. Our revolution requires people who have a great deal of capability and excellence we must never have career student leaders or university veterans who become gatekeepers, preventing others from accessing higher education. Despite the well-known difficulties associated with political activism, SASCO members must lead by example and excel in the classroom. It is your revolutionary duty to get your qualifications and place your skills at the disposal of your movement to better serve the people. The ANC relies on a strong and fighting and radical SASCO to ensure that its progressive policies in higher education are implemented fully and completely. We need a strong SASCO to ensure that bursaries which are meant for the poor actually go to the poor. We need a strong SASCO to ensure that residencies which are meant for students whose homes are far away from campuses truly serve their purpose. We need a strong SASCO to ensure that conditions at institutions of higher learning are improved and are conducive for academic excellence and success. In this regard, SASCO's success in doing all these things is inextricably linked to the ANC's success in building an educated society based on the vision of the Freedom Charter, which was drafted by our forebears. SASCO must remain a united force, truly in the hands of students. And in this regard, I wish all students well in their studies for the remainder of this academic year, especially given the challenges brought about by COVID-19. I also wish SASCO well in the SRC elections in all institutions where they will still be held this year. SASCO's leadership of the student movement is absolutely essential to ensure that the National Democratic Revolution prospers and is attained. And this can be done by SASCO members who are united by an ethos of honor, also by an ethos of solidarity, but also remembering the legacy that you are meant to carry out based on what our forebears have bequeathed you. In the end, the true purpose of university experience, higher education experience that you are going through is not only about the accumulation of factual knowledge and skills, but the formation of ethical and intellectual character. Because according to this notion, we want the education that you're getting to produce a new kind of person dedicated to the enactment, to the achievement of social change that is clearly set out in our NDR. You have a huge task ahead of you because you are the inheritors of this country going forward. And we would say that as students, SASCO members, highly conscientized and highly educated. Whatever you do, you must do with the understanding that your role does not only start and end now. It is a role that you have to carry out into the future. You therefore have to understand your own identity and understand also the history of your own country with a view of plotting the future that our people aspire to have in terms of our national democratic revolution objective. And I wish you well as you celebrate these 29 years. And I would say that may SASCO continue to grow in strength, but more importantly in unity over the next 29 years. You are too important an organization not to succeed. Your future as an organization and as a membership is that you should succeed in executing the objectives of our revolution. It is therefore a pleasure for me, part of this celebration, and to wish you well, and to say, carry on implementing the objectives you have set yourself up for in your sport document. And with that, I say Amanda, and wish you the very best. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. We appreciate your message, and we wish that our demands, our message to you and the African National Congress and our demands